Dream Theater is back. It's been about a year since Mike Portnoy rejoined Dream Theater. I honestly never thought it was going to happen, and it was really unexpected news, but I was super excited. This is the lineup of Dream Theater that I first fell in love with and that I grew up with, and they're back with a new single, Night Terror. I decided a while ago I would do one of my deep dive analysis videos on the first single they dropped, so here we are. If you're new to the channel, this is not a reaction video and this is not a guitar lesson. It's a full musical analysis of Night Terror, the riffs, the rhythms, chord progressions, melodies, structure, instrumentation. I'm gonna cover it all. My goal with this channel is to help all of you to be able to write this kind of music, and by breaking this song down and explaining what's happening, hopefully I can help some of you on that journey. So hit that subscribe button, and let's get to it. The song starts with this. Petrucci is in standard tuning on a 6-string for this song. At least a few songs from every Dream Theater album are on a 6-string in standard tuning, even though Petrucci uses 7 and even 8-string guitars now as well. This intro kind of gives me Pull Me Under vibes. The open strings in the key of E minor is classic Dream Theater stuff. The melodic theme here is this. We're very solidly in E minor here. Now the guys in Dream Theater are gonna mix a number of different minor sounds together throughout the song, but that root note of E is a constant through large portions of this song. The melody goes E, B, A sharp or B flat, and then back to B. Right off the bat, we're introducing that flat 5, B flat, a quintessential dark sounding metal interval, and then it moves to a root of G and F sharp, but we keep that same melodic motif on top, with a slightly different rhythm. And Petrucci is playing these open string Alex Lifeson style chords. He's not playing the full voicing, but these are classic Rush chords. This repeats 3 times, and on the 4th repeat there's a slight variation. Here it goes E, B, B, C, and then E, B, A, B in the melody. And then the root notes do the B to C, and then F sharp to F in the last measure. It's a chromatic walk down leading back to E. So that last part. And this is a pretty normal songwriting trick. You introduce a theme and then give it a variation the last time through, and we'll see more of this idea in some of the riffs later on. Rhythmically, this is super simple, all in 4/4, just quarter notes and eighth notes, allowing this melodic motif to be the focal point and giving Mike Portnoy plenty of space for his triumphant return. And he gives us some classic Portnoy feels right off the bat. This intro slowly builds by layering on different instruments, starting with some soundscapes and then bringing in the whole band, and then adding in a drum groove and more keyboards. And the last time through this intro, there's a heavy riff version of this melodic motif. Dream Theater is taking their time here, really building this tension and anticipation for what's coming up next. And at the end of the intro, there's this big ritardando into a held E power chord, and then the fun begins. I can see why they chose this as the first single for the album. Portnoy really gets to make a statement right away. This is just a straight up cliche Mike Portnoy drum fill, but it sounds really cool in this context, and the drum production is awesome. The toms in particular sound really good, and Portnoy's drums always sound really great. This fill sets up the new slightly faster tempo of 110 beats per minute, and then it's right into the main riff. This riff is 4 measures long in 4/4, straight 16th notes, all rooted on the low E string, pretty standard stuff. The majority of this riff is coming from E Phrygian dominant, save for one note. Phrygian dominant is a scale I've talked about a lot on this channel. It's really common in the prog metal world. Phrygian dominant is the 5th mode of harmonic minor. The intervals are 1, flat 2, 3, 4, 5, flat 6, flat 7. In the key of E, that would be E, F, G sharp, A, B, C, D. So you get some of those dark metal intervals like the flat 2 and the flat 6. But you also have the major 3rd, G sharp in this case. This is kind of a go-to scale for that exotic Middle Eastern sound. This riff does include the flat 3 as well in a few spots, especially in this last measure where it goes 1, flat 2, flat 3, 3, or E, F, G, G sharp, and then back. This I'm viewing as being from the half-whole diminished scale, which is going to come back later in the song as well. The half-whole diminished scale is a symmetrical scale built by alternating half steps and whole steps. In E, that would be E, F, G, G sharp, A sharp, B, C sharp, D. In this riff, they're really just using those first 4 notes, though. This is very much in that Phrygian dominant sound overall. As far as the arrangement goes, guitar, bass, and keys are all doubling this riff after the first time, which is just guitar. Doubling riffs with keys, especially synth or organ, is a great way to beef up a riff and to make it a little proggier. Drum-wise, Portnoy has the 16th note double bass going the whole time. He starts with the snare on every beat and then moves to a double time groove, and this helps to build up the energy on the repeat of the riff. Now here's the whole main riff played slowly. I'm spending a lot of time on this main riff on purpose because this is very much a riff-focused song, and elements from this riff are going to carry over into a lot of the other riffs. Now, I did a whole lesson on this subject a few months back if you want to check it out, the idea of turning one riff into multiple different riffs. And that idea happens right away with this second riff. This second riff is built almost entirely from the last part of the main riff, the part I talked about coming from the half-whole diminished scale, which also comes from a different scale as well, which I'll talk about later. But this makes for the perfect complementary riff to the main riff. You get this lower, slightly slower riff with some halftime drums and some rests, but it's still connected to that first riff by using the same notes. It's a really clever and strong riff writing technique that's basically the opposite of the dreaded riff salad. There's also this run at the end of the riff. It actually happens at the end of the main riff too. This is a transition run that gets used a number of times throughout the song. It also hints at that same scale I was just talking about, which is the Hungarian minor scale. I'll talk about this a lot more when I get to the guitar solo, but just keep in mind that this is technically coming from that scale. And now we finally get some James LaBrie.
Spiders seeking shelter, fading with the dawn, vanishing at sunrise as morning light shines on.
A couple of things about LaBrie here. First off, he sounds great, and they did a good job of putting this song in a part of his range that's strong for his age. I know his voice can be kind of a touchy subject for some people these days, but he's an irreplaceable member of Dream Theater, and I'm glad they're writing in such a way that can hopefully prolong his voice. Also, the vocal production is really good. I feel like they overly layered and affected his voice on a few of the last albums, but this feels a little more raw and stripped back. Underneath the verse is a stripped back version of the main riff. Just playing that first figure and leaving space, and then playing that little transition run. The keyboard plays E major to D minor. That's the 1 to 7 chord in E Phrygian dominant, which confirms my suspicions about this being in Phrygian dominant. The vocal melody is coming from Phrygian dominant, but it's almost more pentatonic in nature, only going to that major third at the end, And pentatonic melodies seem to work over almost anything, so they can be a good choice when the music is dense and complex. And once again, this melody sits in a really good part of James' range, and he performs it well. From here, it's back into the main riff once, and then into the second verse. The second verse starts the same as verse 1, same melody and riff. Here, though, we get a different bass part from John Mayung. He's kind of in the background for most of this song, just doubling guitar riffs, but it's nice to have some places for him to do his own thing here. I especially like this little bass slide that happens. Then it moves up to F sharp for this riff. This is a pretty common Dream Theater trick which they got from Metallica, taking a riff up a whole step, in this case E to F. The structure of this riff is basically the same as the main riff, except it's down here on the second fret. It's still that Phrygian dominant sound with straight 16th notes. The vocal melody also moves up to F sharp, just using an F sharp and E. And it's kind of cliche to go to the F sharp here, but it works well and it helps to break that continuous E tonality that the song has been living in up to this point. From here, it goes back to the intro, which acts as a pre-chorus. This is a combination of the two variations of the intro. The first half is the picked open strings, and the second half is that heavier power chord riff. We also get this nice melody from Jordan Rudess with a pretty classic prog synth sound. One thing that's different here is that the last measure is cut 2 beats short into the chorus, so it goes straight from the F sharp to the chorus. This measure is actually the first time in the entire song that it's not in 4/4, so a note to all you prog musicians, do not be afraid of 4/4. And then it moves into the chorus. The chorus is nice and simple, making for a good contrast against all that high energy riffing. The chord progression here is as follows. C, B minor over D, E minor, B minor, C, F sharp minor 7 flat 5 or F sharp half diminished, B sus to B or B7. Now, up to this point, it's basically been all riffs, so having a more set chord progression is nice, and it helps to differentiate this from the riffing. This is very firmly in E minor. They've been doing the Phrygian dominant thing and some of that half-whole diminished sound, but this brings it right back to a straight E minor sound. So you have the 6th chord C, and then the 5 minor chord B minor, but in first inversion with D in the bass, and then to E minor. So you have this rising bass line, C, D, E, and then we get the minor 5 chord in root position, so B minor in root position. And then the second half, we have the 6th chord C, then a 2-5 progression in E minor. So a half diminished chord, F sharp half diminished, to the major 5 chord, B major, which has a suspension as well. Not a crazy chord progression, but I really like the use of both the minor and major 5 chord here. The major 5 chord is a much more common sound in a minor key, as it leads your ear back to the root chord, which it does at the end of this chorus. But the minor 5 is also a great sound as well, more melancholy with a lot less of that strong pull back to the root. The use of the inverted minor 5 chord here is also really nice. This melody is quite simple based on this walk down the scale, G, F sharp, E. There's a nice strong focus on chord tones here, so you start on the 5th of C. You get the 3rd of E minor, and the 3rd of B minor. You also get the 3rd of F sharp half diminished, and the 5th of B. It's a very singable melody with this stepwise motion, and once again this chorus is a perfect contrast to the rest of the song, and having something simple here is definitely the right call. This 5 chord leads us perfectly back to the main riff, and then Dream Theater does some rhythmic trickery. This is probably the most complex rhythmic moment of the song. Dream Theater is doing a fairly common metric modulation here, but with a little bit of a tempo change as well. The core of what's happening here is a move into 12/8 or 4/4 with a triplet feel. The 16th notes in the main riff become 8th notes in 12/8. Another way to look at this is 3 16th notes become the new triplets. So we have groups of 4, 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3. So that tempo gets slightly faster, but the rate of those 16th notes stay the same. 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3. Now this isn't exactly what they're doing here, so I threw this into my DAW to double check the tempo against a metronome, and it's not an exact metric modulation. To get an exact metric modulation to 12/8, I would take the original tempo of 110, divide it by 4 to get the speed of the 16th notes, which is 27.5, and add that to the tempo of 110, which equals 137.5. So an exact metric modulation would move to a dotted quarter note equaling 137.5. What Dream Theater does here is to start the run that connects these two sections together at 137.5, and then slow it down slightly over the course of this 4-beat run. By the way, this is the same run from earlier, but played in 2 octaves. Here it is with a metronome. Once it hits the full 12/8 section, the tempo is actually dotted quarter note equals 128, so a little slower than you would expect from an exact metric modulation. The truth is that this riff probably just sounded a little bit better at a slower tempo in this triplet feel, so they decided to slow it down during that modulation. Honestly, it doesn't really feel or sound as weird as the explanation behind it. As I'm counting it, I'm just changing those 16th notes from groups of 4 to groups of 3, and that slight decrease in tempo just happens naturally. And all of this sets up the groove for the third verse. This third verse is basically a 12/8 version of the second verse. You have that same riff translated to 12/8, including the key change up to F sharp. There are a couple cool things happening here. One is that the riff pattern gets offset by an 8th note in the second and third bar. It starts on beat 1, and then the exact pattern gets moved back in 8th note in the second and third measure. So 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a... It's a really simple and effective way to get some more mileage out of a riff. The other awesome part here is the drum groove with these offbeat hi-hats. I'm feeling the beat here as a normal 12/8 4 groups of 3, 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a... But Portnoy is putting the hi-hat on every 2 8th notes starting on the second 8th note. Here's the beat. This makes it heavily syncopated, and it also creates this 2 against 3 polyrhythm. And then halfway through the verse, he takes it even further by accenting every other one of these hi-hat hits with a splash cymbal. Very cool stuff, something Portnoy does often, and it's these little tasty, unexpected drum moments that I love about his drumming. Once again, a very simple vocal melody here. It's mostly hanging out on B with a little bit of that Phrygian dominant G sharp there, and then it moves up to E, and when the key change happens, it moves up to F sharp. When it moves to the F sharp riff, Portnoy moves to a tasty tom groove and also adds in some backing vocals. I've always really loved his backing vocals in Dream Theater, and I'm glad to have those back as well. To move out of the 12/8 verse back to the intro, Dream Theater does the opposite metric modulation from earlier, from grouping these 8th notes in groups of 3 to then groups of 4. So you have 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a 1E and a 2E and a 3 and a...
Pierce the silence with a scream. Why can't I remember anything?
Now, during the metric modulation, the tempo doesn't change, but when it hits into the intro, there is a slight increase of just a couple beats per minute. There are actually quite a few small tempo changes throughout this song, which is not something you hear very often these days. I think modern metal musicians are often so locked into the grid that we feel like we can't change tempos within a song, but these tempo changes are almost imperceptible, and sometimes a section of music just needs a different tempo. The intro here is once again slightly different than the previous time it played. You get some harmonics in the guitar and this little scale run to move into the next chorus.
Remember anything.
I like that this intro didn't just happen at the beginning of the song and never return again. Dream Theater is using it as a way to transition into both of the first two choruses. Once again, they're really developing their ideas well here. The second chorus plays exactly the same as the first chorus with one big difference. It's in a different key, and I didn't even notice this on first listen, but they use the exact same melody and chord progression, but this time in A minor instead of E minor. The first chord here is an F, so you get this nice chromatic movement from the intro, which ended on an F sharp. And it's really clever to have the chorus in a different key, and this will come into play even more when I talk about the last chorus, but for now, it's on to the real fun. These super long instrumental passages are a Dream Theater staple, and there's all kinds of fun in this one, including, of course, some odd time signatures. The main odd rhythm that happens throughout this section is a very common prog rhythm, 7 grouped as 2-2-3, in this case 16th notes, so 7-16, 1-2, 1-2, 1-2, 3, 1-2, 1-2, 1-2, 3. This is one of the most common odd time signature rhythms. I actually talked about it in the very first lesson I made for the prog school. It sets the tone for this instrumental section right away. The first section here sticks mostly to that rhythm with a few different tags at the end. I have it written here as 7-8, so 2 of these 7-16 patterns fit inside the 7-8, and I've beamed them to reflect that. The first 4 bars are 3 measures of 7-8 and then a measure of 4-4. The 4-4 is divided as 7-16 and 9-16. The 9-16 just tacks on an extra 8th note divided as 2-2-2-3. The second 4 bars are 3 measures of 7-8 followed by a bar of 12-16. This is played as 4 groups of 3. At the end of the second time through these 8 bars, there's an extra 4 16th notes tagged on the end of the 12-16 bar, making it a measure of 4-4. Here's these 2 parts back to back. So that 7-16 is the foundation, and then they use different variations on the last bar of each phrase. Cool stuff, classic odd time signature phrasing. Now harmonically, this is quite interesting as well. It starts in A minor, which makes sense since the chorus right before this is in A minor. The chords are A minor, E/G sharp, F minor, C sharp minor, then A minor, C minor, B minor, G minor. Now all of that up to the C minor repeats. And then it ends with an E flat diminished 7. You could maybe call this something else since a diminished 7th chord is symmetrical. It could be C diminished or F sharp diminished, but I'm going to call it E flat diminished 7. So it starts in A minor with a 1 to 5 move, and then it goes completely outside. And for the most part, they're just planing these minor chords, which means to move them around at will. So these chords are not coming from a key. Now the keyboard is playing these chords on top, and the bass and guitar are handling the root notes with some passing notes. The run at the end during the 12/16 bar brings back the diminished scale. In this case, whole half diminished, so alternating whole steps and half steps. This is a great scale for those outside sounds. Portnoy is doing some of his famous hi-hat work here, and I really like the groove he's got going on. The second time through this, Rudess starts arpeggiating the chords, and he's hinting at this guitar keyboard melody that's going to happen later. I'm really enjoying a lot of the keyboard sounds here. They're definitely kind of reminiscent of the early 2000s Dream Theater. After it goes through this whole section, it moves to this. This is 8 measures of 4/4 with an ostinato riff in the bass and guitar, just a repeating riff right out of E Phrygian. This leaves space for Portnoy, but it also allows Rudess to imply some interesting harmonies on top. This is an approximation of what Rudess is doing, but he's playing an E major, D minor, and then B flat, and then A minor, F, and then B flat. Now this is all happening over that riff in E, so you get some pretty crunchy chords like a B flat over E and an F over E, kind of really dissonant on purpose. Then it goes back to that first instrumental section, this time with the guitar keyboard melody on top. Here's the guitar part. It's mostly playing chord tones and arpeggiating this progression, and the keyboard is harmonizing using mostly the next inversion of these arpeggios, starting on the third of the first chord, for example, while the guitar starts on the root. This part follows the rhythm and chords really nicely. Guitar and keyboard leads always sound great together, super proggy. I like that the bass guitar gets some room to pop out here as well, since there's no rhythm guitars, which is a good arrangement choice. Then it goes back to the Phrygian ostinato riff, this time with both keys and guitar playing this melody on top, implying basically the same chords that were implied the first time by just the keyboard, and Portnoy does this kind of mini drum solo here. Now it's time for some shredding. This entire section all the way through the end of the guitar solo is coming from one scale sound, a pretty interesting one which I talked about just briefly earlier, the Hungarian minor scale, also called the double harmonic minor scale. It's a harmonic minor scale with a raised fourth, so 1, 2, flat 3, sharp 4, 5, flat 6, 7. Dream Theater is playing F Hungarian minor here, so F, G, A flat, B, C, D flat, E. This has a similar sound to harmonic minor, but there's this 3-note chromatic sound inside of it. Notice when I do that, that's the fill from earlier in the song. What's extra weird about this here, though, is they're actually using a mode of this scale because our root note is E, which is the 7th of this scale. This is called the Ultra Phrygian mode, which might be the most badass scale name ever. It goes back to the 7/16 rhythm here with guitar and keys playing this lightning fast 30-second note pattern. Looks like this slowly. This is utilizing the open E and B strings, which both occur in this scale. It's not too difficult of a pattern, but it's hard to play it this quickly. And it kind of moves its way down then. Here, and then kind of slowly works its way up towards the end. The rhythm guitar and bass hang out on E, and then walk directly up this scale with a rhythm that follows that 7/16 pattern. It's a quarter note and then a dotted eighth note, and the drums join in on the shredding halfway through. And then there's a big old chromatic run that leads into the next part. This next riff is setting up for the guitar solo. This is what's going to happen under the solo, minus the rhythm guitar once the solo kicks in. Once again, it's just walking up this scale with this quarter dotted eighth rhythm, first starting on the root and then on the flat 2 of the scale. The second time through this riff, Petrucci brings in the ringing high E and B strings over this. Very Petrucci sound here. And this leads directly into the solo. The solo is also right from this scale. Here's my cover of it with the tab on screen. I'm gonna go all the way through the big melodic section here as well. I won't do a deep dive into this solo here, but you can at least see how it lays out on the guitar. I like how stripped back the accompaniment is here, just bass and drums, and then the keys join in on the low riff halfway through. It leaves a lot of space for this solo to shine. After the solo, there's a 4-bar transition run using that 7/16 rhythm and a bar of 4/4 at the end. Once again, all right from this scale. That bar of 4/4 leads really nicely into this beautiful guitar melody. After the craziness of the instrumental section, this is a nice breather, some really soulful playing by Petrucci, and a good way to get back to the chorus. It's in 4/4 here again, and the chords are as follows: A minor, E over G sharp, D minor over C, then B flat, and E over G sharp, and then A minor, E over G sharp, D minor, B half diminished, or B minor 7 flat 5, and then E, and then to the chorus. This exact progression is unique to this part of the song, but it does call back to a few other moments. You have the first 2 chords, which are from that first instrumental riff. Then you have the B flat, which happens over that second instrumental riff. Then you have this 2/5, which happens in the chorus. Now it's on to the final chorus. The first time through is in A minor, like the second chorus, and then on the repeat of the chorus, it jumps right up to E minor, like the first chorus. This is really cool, and it's a great way to not only call back to the other choruses, but also to make that last chorus repeat a little bit bigger as it jumps up to a more powerful part of Labrie's range. There's some nice harmonies here as well, and we get this extended B sus to B to build up the tension into the main riff. The song ends with the main riff played twice, and then this ending. This is the same as the ending of the solo with 2 beats added on, and then it ends on a big F note, a nice crazy ending to this song. Alright, there's my marathon of an analysis, but hopefully you got some good tips from it. It was fun to break down the song, and I'm curious to hear the rest of the album. So what are my actual thoughts on this song? Now I think it's pretty good overall. It has all the elements of Dream Theater. It's nice to have Portnoy's influence back, I can definitely hear that. The mix sounds good, but it kind of feels safe overall. I'll wait to pass my final judgment until I hear the whole album, but I'm hoping for a little bit more experimentation. What do you all think of the new Dream Theater single? I'd be curious to hear your thoughts. And if you enjoyed this analysis, please subscribe, hit the bell notification, and maybe share this video with some of your Dream Theater loving friends, as this one was an insane amount of work. But I will see you all in the next video. Until then, stay proggy.